Okay. Thank you. So what I'm going to do today is maybe about 35 to 40 minutes of a presentation, mostly focusing on South Asia, but I believe some of whatever we've been learning in South Asia has global relevance. And then we can have 30, 40 minutes of open discussion. Right? One thing that the British colonial government did in India was to teach us how to speak English very fast. So if I slip into rapid fire English, please tell me to slow down, because I know that English is not your first language for many people here. So I'm going to have this in about 3 or 4 sections. The first part is, we all love food, right? So first part is going to be looking at the agricultural heritage and its destruction in South Asia. I'll do that relatively quickly because everybody has a lot of bad news these days. I don't want to do too much of that. The second part in more detail is going to look at initiatives on the ground towards responding to the crises that not just agriculture, but livelihoods, environment, etc. Are having in South Asia. The third part builds on those examples and sees what are the kinds of overall frameworks of radical transformation emerging from these. And the fourth part is looking at a little bit of networking for what can come up in the future. I think you're all obviously going to be familiar with the social context of a country or a region like South Asia, where even now, despite all the so-called development, 60 to 70% of the population is still directly on a day-to-day basis dependent on land, water, natural resources for their everyday needs. And so when there is ecological destruction, there is a very direct and immediate impact on the livelihoods and food and other sort of basic needs of this population. Okay, so just a quick look at the agricultural heritage that we have in South Asia. We've had, of course, one of the oldest agricultural, pastoral, fisheries, forestry-based communities and societies in the world. Many thousands of years of living with different elements of, and South Asia has a very large ecological diversity, a very large growing conditions of animal husbandry, etc. So through this diversity also, a very large diversity of ways of living, of ways of being, of ways of relating to nature have developed, which includes, of course, very complex and diverse knowledge systems. Very quick glimpse of agricultural biodiversity. I'm sure you've all eaten Indian mangoes at some point or the other. I was a little reluctant to come in this season because this is still the mango season in India, and so I'm missing out on a part of it. But mangoes is just one of the incredible elements of diversity in India. If you take something like sorghum or even more so rice, 300,000, possibly 300,000 varieties of rice that have been developed by farmers over centuries, but a lot more. So more than 1,000 varieties of mango, you probably get 2 or 3 here. And the same with livestock. And this kind of diversification, of course, is not just what is found in nature. It is what is found in nature and then worked on by farming communities, pastoral communities, fisheries communities, using their own knowledge systems, using experimentation, etc. Unfortunately, this heritage has been largely ignored in the process of what we can call agricultural development in India, especially since the 1960s, with the coming in of the so-called Green Revolution, and then subsequently the white as in milk, and then the blue as in fisheries. What we see is that there is a very single-minded approach to productivity, where other elements of the ecosystem, of the agroecological systems are ignored. There's a very single-minded approach to knowledge, which is basically modern science being put in for increasing agricultural productivity, ignoring traditional knowledge systems, etc. And then, of course, all of that requiring a huge amount of external inputs, such as chemicals, hybrid seeds, fertilizers, money to lend to farmers to be able to buy these sorts of things, where earlier they had free access to natural resources. And a lot of monoculturization. So instead of the diversity of crops tending towards much more single species, single variety kind of cultivation over very large landscapes. What we have seen as a result of this is that where food production has definitely increased, there's no doubt about that. On the other hand, the small farmer has been increasingly displaced. They cannot keep up with the economics of this. And there's been incredible amounts of ecological destruction, the degradation of land, the poisoning of soils, of seeds, of food, etc. And we have the rather shameful statistics of the world's largest number of suicides amongst farmers in India. These are mostly small farmers who simply cannot keep up with the economics of this kind of production system. We also have a process of development which takes away very large chunks of agricultural pastoral lands for dams, for mining, for urbanization, etc. So you actually see the physical displacement and or dispossession of agriculture and farming communities across the South Asian area. One figure that we have, which is not an official figure because the government does not keep these figures, is that so-called development projects have displaced about 60 million people just in India, which is larger than the population of most countries in the world. Okay, so if you think of this kind of a scenario, whether it's agriculture or any of the other sectors that we're looking at, one has to then ask questions about development itself. Now, we have two sides of that picture. One side is what is being projected as India, one of the fastest growing economies in the world. By, I think, another 3 years or so, according to our Prime Minister, is going to be the third largest economy in the world. And very high rates of growth, very, if you look at material possessions amongst people as indicators, definitely we seem to be doing extremely well. But then there is the other side, which is literally it has been growth at all costs, whether you take the cost as in the cost to nature, the destruction of forests, natural ecosystems of various kinds, or to communities dependent on them, as I mentioned earlier. In that sense, development comes as a form of violence of many different kinds. We also see, as across the world, that this model of development has actually increased inequalities. In traditional Indian or South Asian society, we already had inequalities of gender, of casteism, etc. But there's been added to by increasing economic and financial inequality. And you can actually see now 5% of the richest Indians earning as much as the rest of the 95%. And the more we actually move towards a capitalist economy from what was supposedly at least a socialist economy, most production happening in the public sector, to now much of the production happening with the private sector, you also see an increasing trend towards the informalization of labor. So more than 90% of India's labor is actually in the unorganized or the informal sector, which means they can be kicked out at any point in time, extremely vulnerable to any kind of economic shifts. We also see that while there is growing food production, and that's an important fact, I don't want to deny that, we have still very, very, very high levels of food insecurity and malnutrition. And in fact, in some cases, malnourishment or what's called stunting amongst children has actually increased because typically what is happening is that small-scale farmers who are producing their own foods and using a lot of traditional foods like millets and so on. I don't know if you're all familiar with millets, traditional non-wheat, non-rice grains, which is what most of India used to eat. Those are displaced, and instead of that, you might be growing cash crops like cotton or sugarcane, which is going into the market. And then what you buy from the market is typically very non-nutritious thing like polished white rice. So we are actually seeing a massive nutrition crisis in many parts of India. At the same time, because you have this nutrition crisis, so when something like the COVID pandemic hits or some other such disease, it affects people that much more. And these are mostly people who can't even afford private healthcare. And the public healthcare system has actually also been in decline. So you see in multiple different ways that actually hundreds of millions of people are being badly affected by this kind of development process. Add to that the latest threat of climate crisis. We have, I think last year in India, Out of 365 days, we had 260 or 270 days of extreme weather events somewhere or the other in India. We are seeing projections that if this continues, we have 1.5 to 2%, 2-degree temperature rise, maybe about 30% of India's agricultural production would drop. And of course, again, it's going to be the most marginalized sections of people, including women and children, who will be very badly affected. Okay, that's the bad news. I'm going to stop there. I don't want to depress all of you further. So the question is, are there alternatives? Do we have other ways of producing the food we need, producing the products that we need, feeding people, et cetera, which are not done in the same way that we've been doing over the last few decades? I think we actually see in South Asia broadly two kinds of alternatives. One is resistance movements, where people whose lands are sought to be taken away, whose water is sought to be taken away, whose livelihoods are sought to be changed dramatically, are saying no. We're okay with what we have, or we want to do things differently. We don't want to do them in the way that you're telling us, US and government or in corporations. This is a picture from the 1980s of a demonstration against 2 mega hydroelectricity projects in central India, where 300 villages would have been displaced or drowned by these dams, and all the forests that you see in the back would also have been drowned. So these people were protesting against them, saying, we don't want to be evicted from here. We want to continue living in these villages. Even if we have some things, we don't have access to some things, we would much rather get access here rather than go somewhere else where you're promising us good housing, etc. But even more importantly, what they were saying was that for the government, this river is a commodity. It is hydroelectricity in megawatts. For us, the river is our mother. It is what has given us life. And we simply don't share the dreams you share of how the river should be used. For us, the river is a sacred being. It is not only about using it as a commodity. So you actually see movements of this kind across South Asia and across the world, where it is not just about saying no to something. It is also about other ways of relating to the rest of nature, relating to each other, other ways of acting, other ways of behaving, other ways of thinking, knowing, dreaming, etc., which are emerging from these resistance movements, and also challenging the fundamental structures that are bringing in these so-called models of development into places like South Asia. It's also a form by which the grabbing of land, as I mentioned earlier, of the damage to forests and wetlands and coastal areas and so on, of bringing in very intensive forms of production in the so-called Green Revolution or Blue Revolution, are resisted and stopped. So in at least some parts of India, they have been just basically physically stopped by these movements. And of course, more recently, resistance against genetically modified organisms or other new technologies that are coming into South Asia. Now, when this happens, of course, the system hits back, because clearly interests are affected, either corporate or government interests. And so then many people, such as this one of our most prominent agroecology activists, Kavita, was branded as being funded by foreigners who don't want India to develop, anti-national, blah, 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 and many others have been charged as being sedition, as in conspiring to act against the Indian state. So that's one kind of resistance, which continues, of course, in many parts of South Asia. One kind of alternative, which is resistance. The other is where people have needs which are not being met, whether it's food, energy, housing, local voice, equality between genders, etc. There is then also, we find thousands of examples of more constructive alternatives, right? People being able to meet these needs and aspirations without causing the problems the mainstream system is causing. I'll just give you a glimpse of some of these in different parts of South Asia. For me personally, this is an example I've been relating to for the last 30 years. It is possibly the most inspiring one, because it comes from a group of women, small-scale farmers, who also belong to the most oppressed section of India's society, the so-called Dalits or untouchables or outcasts, right? So they're triple disprivileged, as in casteism, in patriarchy, and in the economic class system with very small farming operations. Till about 35 years back, they were facing the same problems that millions of families face when they are this kind of marginalization. And what they did then was to form women's collectives in many villages, about 75 villages, then get together as a single sort of federation of women's collectives, start thinking about how they wanted to actually get rid of the kind of systems, both the social oppression, but also the economic problems they were facing vis-a-vis their agriculture, by bringing back their traditional diversity of seeds, and especially millets, which I mentioned earlier. So about 75 to 80 varieties of or species of crops, which they brought back, switched completely back to organic, shared their knowledge, shared their seeds, shared anything else, did collective farming, whatever forms they could to kind of try and create some level of food security, which was the most pressing issue in their families. But then also start arguing for not just food security, but food sovereignty, which means complete control over everything to do with food, over the seeds, the knowledge, the land, including fighting for land rights for women, which is very unusual in India, and many other aspects of what could be called food sovereignty. I could actually talk about this example for 2 hours. So I'm just dealing with these are all complex things. They've been going for 30, 40 years. So dealing with them in 2 minutes each is obviously doing it disservice, but just wanted to give you a glimpse of some of this. Through all of this agricultural revolution, where now 5,000 families have enough food to eat, but also sell some in the market, they've also dramatically changed their status as women and as Dalits, as so-called outcasts, to be much more respected in the village. So it's an interesting example of how transformations in one sector can actually lead to transformations in a completely, what we might think of as unrelated sectors, but of course they're related. In Northeast India, close to the Burma-Myanmar area border, the state of Nagaland, we have indigenous peoples who have been practicing their traditional forms of agriculture, including shifting cultivation, where they go from plot to plot and then come back after 5 years or 6 years, or settled agriculture, such as these terraced rice farming. Again, like each of these villages might have 50, 60, 70 varieties of rice traditionally. Again, in some cases had been lost, but are coming back to it. So this is a women's network, women farmers network also, which is trying to assert its own food security and sovereignty using their own traditional methods. Both in the previous example and this one, it's important to note that it's not that they're completely rejecting everything from modern science and technology. They're saying, okay, some of it may be relevant, but we will use it to the extent it's appropriate and relevant for us, not in the way it's imposed from above. Bangladesh, again, many thousands of farmers are involved in this Naya Krishi. Naya Krishi means new agriculture. Andolan means movement. So new agriculture movement, basically very similar to the previous 2 examples I've given you, trying to assert their own smallholder-based, local knowledge-based, sustainable agriculture. In southwestern India, we have what is a global biodiversity hotspot, the so-called Western Ghats. And here there's a movement that is trying to bring back the tradition of home gardens. So every house would have their own small plot of land where they would grow things for local domestic consumption, spices, coconut, whatever is needed in the house, which is something that was lost in a lot of families because commercial production came in and it was replaced by cash crops for the market. So that's kind of, again, women's groups trying to bring that kind of thing back because it's so crucial for domestic food security. Now, moving from farming to pastoralism, India has a very large pastoral population, including fairly many communities that still do migrant or nomadic pastoralism, but facing serious problems because their nomadic routes are cut by dams or canals or cities or whatever. And also because it's considered to be socially a very backward form of living, that you're living with the animals and you're moving from place to place. You don't even have a house address, right? So what's your address? I don't have an address because I move all through the year. So all that is considered to be socially backward and economically backward. So there's a lot of pressure for them to transform and change, including for the new generations. So in these, some of these communities, they're trying to actually sustain or revive their forms of nomadic pastoralism or settled pastoralism with sometimes new things, like, for instance, camels in Western India, actually generating products using camel milk, which, in cities almost nobody's heard of, but then negotiating with one of the biggest dairies of India to actually even sell camel milk butter or camel milk ice cream, or create local producer-consumer relationships of that kind, with wool, with milk, with different products from the animals, so that they can actually sustain or create sort of a hybrid of old and new forms of livelihoods. Wild foods have been a very crucial part of nutrition for many of India's communities, especially forest-dwelling communities, and of course fisheries. And again, lost for many reasons. Maybe sometimes those ecosystems are gone. Sometimes, you can have your kids going to school, and in the school, the teacher says, "What? You eat food from the forest? You're backward. Stop doing that. You have to eat wheat and rice, which you buy from the market." So even social things of how, what is considered high status and low status in terms of what you're eating or using. So here in some of these movements now, people are doing wild food festivals. We do one very close to my city, for instance, every 6 months, to recreate the sort of joy and enjoyment and the knowledge of using foods from the wild. The phenomenon of communities sustaining or reviving the conservation of natural ecosystems, both in terms of the spiritual value of those, so in terms of the ethics and the spiritual value of it, but also, of course, for sustaining their own livelihoods, especially food systems. So again, actually hundreds, maybe thousands of examples across South Asia of this, what we can call community conserved areas. One very interesting lesson that we learned in the COVID pandemic period was that where communities had these sorts of systems intact or were able to very quickly rebuild them, they survived in the COVID pandemic much better than those communities who were linked to large-scale to long-distance markets. Because if you were linked to long-distance markets, you either didn't have the access to the food that you depended on, or you couldn't sell your product to consumers that you were able to earlier. And so there was an economic collapse, not just a health, but an economic collapse. We have 70 examples in these documents available on our website of cases where communities were much more resilient because they had their localized food systems or localized economic exchange systems, and also the community structure on the community spirit of solidarity, which was able to sustain them. Now, if you were to sort of combine some of these kinds of movements with also movements for local self-reliance and other things like other forms of livelihood, small-scale manufacturing, local exchange, economic exchanges, the transformation of villages to be much more, what should I say, sort of vibrant in terms of the cultural thing, the health, the education, etc. You find that this phenomenon of people moving out of villages into cities, which is a global phenomenon, is actually reversed in a few cases, which show the possibility of, in fact, slowing down the processes of urbanization that places like South Asia face. Of course, a huge challenge. I'm not saying it's going to happen easily, but at least it shows the potential. So these are examples where people who had moved out into the cities have actually moved back to the village because they find very vibrant livelihoods and education and health systems there. And part of this is also the argument that's coming up in a number of communities in South Asia, which is about democracy. Now, what do we think of in terms of decision making? Why should decisions on agriculture or land or forests or water or livelihoods or housing or manufacturing be taken by the government or corporations and not by the community itself? So here is an example of 90 villages that have got together, first of all, to resist mining, the imposition of mining from outside by the government, but also to assert their own forms of governance, assert their cultural identity, assert that if there is to be education system, it needs to build on the existing ways of learning, while even also accepting what might come in from the modern education system, and also assert that even internally, if there are inequalities, for instance, gender inequalities in decision making, then that also needs to be transformed. I'll come back to some of these in terms of the frameworks that are emerging. Also, in some of these movements, people have realized that if farmers have to relate to the market in some way, at least in the short run, even as they try and achieve some level of self-reliance, each individual farmer trying to do something in the market is is a situation of power inequality. Farmers cannot deal with. But if you were to have 3,000 farmers producing, making a farmer company, a producer company run democratically, where all the producers collected, it is, you're able to actually generate much better returns. You can also link up directly with consumers to be able to have the returns coming directly, and you're able to give the consumers healthy food. So this is one example in the South, a company called Dharani, which has been able to actually do this with about 3,500 farmers now. Also, what's very important is, if you remember, I was talking about the fact that, what kind of food is eaten, what kind of livelihood is you have, also has a social status. Over the British colonial period and subsequently too, we've all been kind of brainwashed into thinking that the only foods worth eating are wheat and rice. And that also as polished as possible, as white rice as possible and as polished a wheat as possible. The flour needs to be as white as possible. There's a lot of racism built into all this, by the way. And forget about all the so-called coarse grains, the millets. There's dozens of varieties of other grains that we had, or other kinds of foods. So another part of the movement is to actually reestablish the status of a diversity of foods, including many of the traditional foods and the traditional recipes and the sort of cuisines, the diversity of cuisines and food systems that we have had in India. So many examples of farmers markets, direct farmer consumer relationships, and many others in several cities in India. Okay, the last couple of things on this I'll talk about in terms of examples and then do my final section on framework. I keep saying what we think of in terms of a particular livelihood or a particular kind of food is socially constructed. It's culturally constructed, right? And a lot of that is what we learn in school as we're growing up or from our families. And so the schooling system in South Asia also needs to be fundamentally questioned, because basically the schooling system was put in place by the British colonial government, and very explicitly so-called Lord Macaulay, who actually established it, told the British government that if you want to continue ruling in India, it's going to be less through the military and more through converting people's minds. If you brainwash Indians into thinking that the British way of life is in fact the way to do it, then you don't need to have a military anymore. And that's what the education system was explicitly set up for. Unfortunately, post-independence too, all across South Asia, we have more or less the same system, which alienates children from their own natural systems, their own cultural systems. It basically tells children that what you need to do is cram this information, put it into your exam paper, and then move up in life. And that the aims of life are basically to become rich, famous, and powerful. So these are alternative learning spaces. These are all from India, but there are many in other parts of South Asia also, where the attempt is to try and create a learning experience which is somewhat similar to what children would have learned in their own communities, but also with inputs from outside, where you learn the local ecologies, the local culture, the local growing systems, etc. For instance, that in the top picture, you're seeing that the kids are learning how to make sugarcane juice, but at the same time, they're learning physics and chemistry, the physical and chemical properties of sugarcane juice. And so it's trying to combine hands and mind, but also heart, and that was Mahatma Gandhi's what he called the Nai Talim way of education, which is to have not just head, but head, hands, and heart, which means that you're also learning values. You're learning that your elders in the community are as much teachers as somebody who's got a PhD in your school. You're learning that the value of doing things together is much more important than me individually coming first and becoming famous and powerful and rich. So it's a whole different way of thinking of the education system. One of my favorite pastimes is to look at the original meanings of words. And I learned when I was doing this that the original word for school was schole in Greek, which meant leisure. I think 95% of India's schools are prisons, as far away from leisure as possible. So these are attempts at trying to create something different. And finally, I think the more this kind of thing happens, the more you have this kind of churning on the ground, combined with advocacy for policy shifts, you see that at least sometimes the government can also bring in some policy shifts. For instance, in India, some of the recent laws and now increasing support for organic farming in several states. In Sri Lanka, a very dramatic move towards trying to become 100% organic, which collapsed because they just tried to do it too fast and without proper systems in place. But at least, some policy shifts also beginning to take place. Now, I actually also give lots of examples from around the world, but today I'm not going to do that. But to also mention that we do have this book, I'll talk about it at the end, which has 100 examples of these kinds of radical alternatives in different parts of the world. So again, obviously, this is not something happening only in South Asia, it's happening across the world. I love this map, by the way. At least in India, when I show it, people say, why is it upside down? And then we talk about colonialism and the maps being all from the colonial era, and Europe is put on top, and Europe is made to look much bigger than it actually is. You can see the actual sizes of the continents here. And England actually disappears. Okay, just quickly, one that again I was very inspired by and was lucky enough to visit. This is the Parque de la Papa, the potato park in Peru, where the Quechua indigenous people, very similar to the Indian movement I was talking about, have sustained their governance over a very large biocultural landscape, which is also one of the places that potatoes originated. And through that, create food sovereignty and local livelihood independence and so on. And of course, some of you, I'm sure all of you know about La Vi Campesina in terms of the global movement of this kind of attempt at trying to have smallholder-based food security and food sovereignty. Also, we have many examples of COVID time resilience from other parts of the world, not just from India, again, with similar lessons of where and why communities were more resilient. Okay, so the last 5-10 minutes I'll take is trying to look at from these sorts of examples and many others, what are the broad visions or frameworks of transformation that are emerging. From the Indian experience, we have developed this sort of analytical tool of what we call the flower of transformation, where we look at 5 spheres of life as intersecting petals: the politics, economics, social, society, culture, and ecology. It's a bit of an artificial distinction, but we know that life is lived in the messy intersections between them, but still it's a way of trying to understand. And I'm not going to go into detail. In the talk that I'm doing on the 3rd of July in Castle University, I'm going to actually do this in much more detail. But essentially, if you look at it just quickly, the radical democracy, the politics part, is where people are saying that democracy is not just about elections. It's about us taking, claiming, and using power where we are. Village community, urban neighborhood, educational institution, whatever it is. We are all equal partners in taking decisions. The economics of it is about much more self-reliance, much more of the economy of caring and sharing, not just finance, much greater control by producers over what is being produced, and consumers over what's being consumed, etc. And of course, the commons. With social society, it's about struggles for gender equality, against casteism, different forms of discrimination, struggles against those. With culture and knowledge, every one of the examples I'm giving of transformation are where people have asserted their own cultural uniqueness, their own knowledge systems, but also accepted things from outside, not simply saying that no to anything from outside, but saying what's relevant to us, yes, and then building hybrid systems. And of course, without ecological resilience, we're all dead anyway. So one of the worldviews of this kind of transformation that we sort of trying to regenerate in India is a very old notion called Swaraj, which means self-rule. But it's not just about autonomy, it is about being autonomous, being free, having self-determination, but with responsibility towards your freedom and your happiness and your self-determination. It's not the American view of freedom that if a country doesn't give me cheap petrol, I'll go and bomb it, because that's my American way of life, not that. It is really that we have rights, but we also have responsibilities. We would do what we want, but within constraints and restraints so that it doesn't undermine somebody else. And where then, of course, personal lives become political, what we're doing in our lifestyles has a very direct impact on what's happening in society and vice versa. And for Gandhi, who actually brought this back during the independence struggle, politics very deeply intertwined with spiritual ethics and principles, not mainstream religion, just fundamental ethics of compassion, solidarity, etc. So we have, some of us have kind of extended this to call it Eco-swaraj, where we say that the sense of responsibility is not just towards other people, but towards the rest of nature. So where all species are considered to be equal. And so I have responsibility to make sure that the earth and all species are also being protected. But it's a very simple idea. We are all decision makers. We all should be claiming the power that we are born with, but we exercise that power with restraints and responsibilities. Similar notions across the world. So the book I was mentioning has, I think, about 90 examples of these from different parts of the world. I have 2-3 copies here if somebody is interested in purchasing one. But so I won't go into that, but there's some amazing things happening, both in terms of old notions from indigenous peoples being revived in the current system, current context, but also emerging from, so you mentioned degrowth as emerging from within the capitalist industrialized societies. And what I think binds this whole pluriverse, it's a very, very diverse set of alternative worldviews and practices. What I think binds us together is some set of common values and principles, such as, for instance, the fourth one here, cooperation, not competition. The commons, not privatization, right? So not solidarity, not intense individualistic hostility. The rights of not just human beings, but also the rights of the rest of nature. Pursuit of nonviolence in many different forms. I mean, I'm not going to go into all of these. And these can be expressed in many, many different ways across the world, but I think there's some common elements there. Essentially saying we're talking about worldviews that celebrate life, not money, not power, not fame, but life. And that turns around a whole set of things that we're otherwise used to. I'm going to skip this in the interest of time. I think there's a lot of challenges, of course, that we face if we're trying to talk about things like food sovereignty, etc., in India, in the South Asian context. One of the biggest challenges is that organic food across India, especially in cities, is very expensive. So we have this strange phenomenon that the poor in cities in India are still eating junk food because that's cheap. And people like me are able to go to a organic food store and get organic food. It's much more expensive. So how do we actually turn that around? And one way to do it could be that the subsidy that's going into chemical-based agriculture, and in India it's massive, you can see the figure there, is shifted for a short time into organic. I'm saying for a short time because we don't want the government to be subsidizing sustainable farming all, forever. That's maybe one way of doing it, but we need to find other things also. This whole thrust that we have in India, a Food Security Act, which is good because the government is accountable for those who don't have enough food, but it's not adequate. We'll go beyond that and talk about a Food Sovereignty Act with the kind of movements that we have. A lot of the recent trend towards supporting organic farming is actually meant not for domestic consumption, but for export, which is another big problem. In many of our farming communities, the new generations have been so brainwashed into thinking that it's only the IT and all of that, which is really hip, which is cool to go into and not agriculture, then you're actually having entire generations leaving it. And not their fault. It's quite understandable. We also have a challenge of some states or countries like Sri Lanka picking up on organic farming. Okay, within the next 5 years, the whole country will be organic. It doesn't work quite like that. You need processes, you need, all sorts of systems in place. You need to create the local institutional capacity to carry that forward. And if you don't do that, it's going to collapse. We have now more and more corporate takeover of all the language we're talking about. So now all corporates are saying we are eco-friendly, we are organic, we are this, we are that. So how do you actually distinguish between the radical alternatives of smallholder-based agriculture and large corporations that are taking over? And then finally, how to put all these thousands of examples together into scale. And here, I think the lessons we learn is that we're not talking about any single initiative getting bigger and bigger and bigger, the upscaling model, or I'm copying what the Dalit women farmers are doing in my area, but actually learning from these processes, the lessons, the principles, the values, etc., and trying it out in my own area, and then networking, connecting as horizontal networks and creating scale with that, which I call outscaling and not upscaling. All right, there's many different people's movements across South Asia that are trying to put a lot of people and organizations and movements together. I think one or two of these are also allied with the with La Via Campesina. And one process we started a few years back is called the Vikalp Sangam, or the confluence of alternatives, putting together people in different fields, not just agriculture and food and all, but also education, health, gender movements, etc., to come together, learn from each other, collaborate, create more joint actions, and create a vision of India that you know, what's our sort of how do we envision India, let's say in 2100, and then how do we try and sort of move towards that? So a lot of that is also celebrations, having fun, going and eating each other's foods, and documenting stories. So this website has more than 2,000 stories of positive transformation from different parts of India. We're trying to expand it to South Asia now. And then through that experience, starting this global tapestry, which is similar movements in different parts of the world connecting with each other for the same purpose of learning, collaborative action, more critical mass for global advocacy, joint actions, etc. This is a website which has stories from many parts of the world. At any point in time, if any of you is feeling depressed with the state of things, please go to either this website or the earlier one that I showed you from India. At least for some time, you'll feel a little cheered up. There is some good news in the world. Right, so that's the book I just mentioned. It's now available in 4 or 5 languages, and I'm happy to say here that there's a German version coming out in September. There's a brochure there which you can pick up, so that you will also have it in German. Right, that's it. It's much more on this website than what I've said. Thank you. I hope I've been able to give you a little bit of a glimpse of what's happening in South Asia.
Thank you for your nice presentation. We get a lot of information from this seminar. I have only 2 questions. The first question is, India, they have a large amount of varieties, rice about more than 30,000, sorghum, livestock, and others, which is very good, especially relatively with developing countries like Africa. For example, in Ethiopia, as I have a data, not more than 5,000 varieties are not released from all the crops, from all livestock, and the livestock feed. So why would insecurities increase despite all the varieties existing in the country? Why food insecurities continue? The second question is about the food sovereignty and GMO. Why need to focus on food sovereignty? To the level of my knowledge, food sovereignty is local-based productions based on indigenous crops. It may not give surplus production or adequate production for the consumptions. Opposite to this, GMO is provide adequate production for the communities in order to solve the food insecurity problems. So why need to focus on food sovereignty? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks. Are you from Ethiopia?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, first of all, for coffee. Originated in Ethiopia. So, okay. Why, despite agricultural diversity in all the traditional systems and all, has food insecurity increased in a country like, or in, say, a region like South Asia? There's many historical reasons for it, but if you look at especially the recent history of colonial takeover of power in India, British colonialism, there was actually a very deliberate attempt to make farming systems dependent on the government and to have farming systems create for the larger market, including the European market, and taxation. So if you see, there's actually a wonderful book on famine in the British Empire. If you read that, you will find that actually across wherever the British colonized the world, famines significantly increased. That is not because of the natural, so-called natural phenomenon, but it's because of the fact that there was things like land taxation, very heavy levels of taxation, and food being picked up and exported, and changes in land use systems. So a lot of what we see in terms of food insecurity in South Asia is related to 150 years of colonial rule. There's a lot of historical evidence on this. This is not to say that therefore there was no food insecurity before that. There may have also been before that, but much lower levels. And even before that, you would find that there were feudal systems. So there was, in some cases, feudalism, where you'd have a big landlord controlling a large part of land, which in fact is what the British also used. They then used the feudal landlords to become the agents between themselves and the people, and those landlords became even more powerful. But even the pre-colonial times, you would have some systems like that, but there was nowhere near the kind of food insecurity that was created with the during colonial times. You might have heard of the Bengal famine, some of you. Bengal famine is when I don't know how many millions of people died. At the same time that from the same areas where people were dying, food was being, crops were being taken out, exported. They were not available to the local people themselves, but were being taken out, and the local people were dying in millions. So that's one and then post-independence in India, unfortunately, the same policies have kind of continued. You don't have the same levels of land taxation, etc. But the policies of making farmers more and more dependent on an outside system, either the market or the government or both, have continued. And that has also sustained food insecurity, because if you're dependent on the market and the market changes, or you're dependent on the government, and today the government is providing you, tomorrow it doesn't provide you anymore, then your food insecurity is going to be that much more. So that's one whole, it's a complex history. I'm giving it to you in 3 minutes, but that's the sort of large picture. In terms of genetically modified organisms and high production, it's possible that GMOs can give us higher production, but two issues here. Number one, GMOs and most hybrid seeds also, in fact, are in the control of either the private corporate sector or the government. Farmers will have to constantly buy from the market if you're using, say, a GMO, right? Which means the same thing. Today, the corporation might give it to you at X euros per kilo. Tomorrow, it might say, no, sorry, I'm going to increase the price to 2x per kilo. What are you going to do? So what we're arguing is that if you can actually find from local seeds, highly productive seeds, which you then have control over, then why go in for GMOs? And we have research in India by a rice research scientist called Dr. Risharia, which shows highly productive rice varieties, traditional rice varieties in many parts of India, which were deliberately ignored or set aside, or in fact exported to the Rice Research Institute in Manila and no longer available to the farmers themselves, which were highly productive. And we didn't need to go in for the hybrid varieties that we went into. So it's again a kind of a difficult, a complex subject. But movements in India feel that we don't need to go the GM direction because we have our own diversity, which can actually produce enough. As long as we don't put so much of our agricultural land into cash crops or take it away for mining and dams and things like that. If we have enough food producing land available, then we have the local diversity to produce enough food. That's what the movements are saying. And I'm not talking about how GM might be problematic for health and all of that, because that's another sort of controversial area, but just in terms of food security.
Thanks a lot, Ashish. Thanks a lot for this inspiring set of examples, certainly needed in these times. Very interesting. And I would want to give you the opportunity to some extent to elaborate on one concept you put on your presentation, this flower. I'm very interested in this idea of economic democracy. So I don't think I have come across this, to be honest. What role does redistribution play in this, for example? Many would say that the economic system as we have it maybe in Europe, maybe that's very different from what your context you're describing, that is to some extent democratic, or what are these differences? How is it embedded, this economic system that you're referring to? It sounds fundamentally different somehow than what I'm used to. The other question, second question, sorry, is about you're a little bit alluding to the fact that external influence is sometimes demonized, I think. For example, in the Indian context, there are certain forces ascribed to that. I think that is almost a contemporary debate and an issue currently in India. But altogether, so how do we distinguish different kinds of influence taking, and how do you see the role of NGOs, foreign donors of different types in bringing about these movements and developments that you were describing? Do we need to, does India need to be critical and evaluative about these forces or these donations? Or how should one see that in relation to this transition? Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. Critical questions. So for us, I mean, currently the economic system in South Asia is highly dominated by a combination of the government and private sector. It was, let's say, in India, let's say post-independence, for the first 2 or 3 decades, there was mostly government control, public sector in most economic production and exchange and so on. But then after 1991, when India opened up to globalization, the private sector has also come in a big way. Both the Indian private sector, but also the multinational private sector has come in a big way. And if anything, we've moved away from any form of economic democracy than towards it over the last few decades. What would we mean by economic democracy? It would mean that, for instance, production processes go back in the hands of producers. It could be across all sectors of the economy, whether it's the so-called primary sector of agriculture and so on, or it's secondary of manufacturing or the digital economy or whatever. So if 5,000 people are working in a Tata company steel plant, why shouldn't those 5,000 workers actually be in control of the production processes and then earning whatever should be earned, rather than Mr. Tata making most of the profits? It's typical non-capitalist or anti-capitalist kind of argument. But what I think is important is to see where this might already be happening. And we don't have so much of it in the manufacturing sector, but we do have it now increasingly in the primary sector, like the producers' companies that I was talking about, where there's much more democratic functioning and much more of an ability to negotiate with the market than would otherwise be the case. But also, I think with economic democracy, very important for us and maybe across the world, is the recognition that there is an economy under the financial economy, which is very, very important. what Graham and Gibson from Australia call the community economies. I think we have a essay in this also on that, community economies, or the invisibilized role of women in the production reproduction cycle, which is underlying the economy in some sense, right? But never gets recognized in the formal economy. So, how do we actually firstly recognize that very important part of the economy and then give it the importance, not by financializing it, but by giving it the importance it needs to be given in any kind of economic planning and decision making. So these are some aspects. There's much more, of course, but I think these are some of the aspects, which also then is about what are the indicators of development itself. I mean, all countries use GDP, right, except for Bhutan, which, as we all know, is a completely nonsensical indicator of any kind of well-being. Right, so you can have the highest GDP growth rate in the world, and you can have 90% of your people not having enough food, because the 10% are what are raising the GDP, right? So, what are those? How do we move beyond that into indicators which are really truly meaningful? Does everybody have adequate, nutritious food to eat? Does everybody have clean air? Does everybody have clean water? Does everybody have learning opportunities, etc., 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 which many countries are now beginning to discuss, but none have yet adopted except for Bhutan. So all of this, I think, will fall into the realm of economic democracy. As transitional stages, I think redistribution would be a very, very crucial part of it. So there are economists in India who have actually shown that with just a 1% increase in taxation, income tax of the 2% rich in India, richest 2% in India, and a 2% inheritance tax, we could generate enough money to have free basic need services for the entire population of India. And yet the government of India is not moving to that. It's not a very big thing. It's not we're saying that we're going to tax you 30%. It's just 1% income, 2% inheritance. And yet we're not doing that. So in that sense, redistribution, at least in the interim, let's say to fund, for instance, the move to organic agriculture, would be very, very important. But that would be transitional. It doesn't have to be a long-term thing. Universal basic income, there's been long debate again in India as to whether we move that direction or not. Some people feel that again, as a short term, we should move towards it because people simply don't have enough income. But again, not as a long-term measure, because then you're again dependent on a state system for even your basic needs. So these are some of the sorts of debates going on. In terms of the demonization of foreign sources, yeah, we've all been, including myself, have been called agents of foreign organizations that don't want India to develop, etc. So I think evaluating our sources of non-Indian or foreign, whether it's funding or other kinds of support, is absolutely crucial. Yes. And what we actually respond to our government is saying that, you were the first ones to actually take foreign funding, not NGOs. When India in 1991 went into the globalization phase, it was because IMF and World Bank was twisting our arms, saying that you want, further loans or grants or whatever, then you need to move into what they call structural adjustment, right? That is opening up the economy to globalization. So the first ones, actually, the first foreign funded organization in India, which distorted India's economy and society significantly, was the government itself. That's our response to them, saying that when you accuse us of being foreign funded, look at your own policies over the last 20, 30 years. But beyond that, it does seem to me that foreign monies or support does come with different kinds of interests. And some of it would clearly be interests where they want India to remain subservient or Indian NGOs to remain subservient, right? But others, including, I'm happy to say, a couple of German foundations, are where they say that, no, we recognize that you're doing radical transformation work. We also recognize that it's not easy to get funded for that. We're happy to give you the money, use it in whichever way you want. I think that's the kind of evaluation we'll have to make as to what ones are truly helping in radical transformation, which ones are kind of sustaining the status quo in some sense. And we use the flower of transformation also to actually see, okay, if money is coming from any source for, let's say, wildlife conservation, yeah, what does it mean in terms of the status, the rights of communities living in wildlife conservation areas. Is that being factored in, or does it mean that people are going to be evicted from the tiger reserve? So how do you look at things in a more holistic way? I just did a paper for GIZ, by the way, with all these arguments, because they asked for what would radical transformation look like for a international cooperation sector. And all of this is what I argued. I also argued that as Germans, you need to also figure out how to decolonize yourself. Apologies if this causes any whatever, but the colonial countries are as colonized as those you colonized, right? So in the sense of mindsets, especially, what is it to have a good life? What kind of consumption patterns? Even this mindset that I want to help the third world or global south, all of these things have to be also questioned within the donor countries and the donor agencies, and the way donor agencies also work. So that's what I wrote to GIZ. I don't know how they take it, but so yeah, that's response to your second question. Thanks. Thanks.
Yeah. I would like to one question. The same thing we was talking about, that in the context of the new political changes around the world, like the BRICS economy, the BRICS. I would like to have your point of view, like in the context, maybe also on the BRICS context now.
Yeah.
And also maybe what maybe changes from, or maybe going good, or what maybe going wrong.
Right. What's your name? Sorry.
Sorry, my name is Ajay Remo.
Ajay.
Yeah.
So yeah, BRICS is a very, very interesting thing. I have to confess, I have not followed it as closely as I would have wanted to. But I have, my view is the following. Insofar as BRICS might be able to set up, is everybody familiar with BRICS? Okay, sorry. So BRICS is Brazil, Russia. It was a formulation that came up many years back between Brazil, Russia, South Africa, India, and China, saying they want to set up a bloc which can then oppose American imperialism and also even create an alternative for, say, the World Bank, so that it could have the monies could be generated by these 5 economies, very large economies, that were independent of American influence. Basically, I mean, that's broadly the kind of thinking. And in fact, the BRICS Bank was also, in fact, I think has been started, the BRICS Bank, so that you could independently fund, and that's also in some senses a foreign funding initiative. Okay. Insofar as it might be able to challenge American hegemony and imperialism, sounds good. The problem is that it's not as if the governments of these 5 countries are necessarily more democratic, especially now. Right? If you look at all of these, Russia, India, China, South Africa, Brazil. I mean, okay, Brazil has Lula, but you can think of that this way or that way. There are signs of authoritarianism in all of them, but not just that. There's also very clear, it's very clear that all of these countries are also basically in the same neoliberal capitalist mindset as the United States. They're not as powerful as the US in influencing the global thing, but they are the same mindset. And so what you then see is that instead of, let's say, American or America supported things, United States supported things colonizing, we have internal colonization. China has internally colonized its indigenous peoples for decades. India is currently internally colonizing many parts of India itself. India has an Indian government to do extractive activities, right? Like the examples that I showed you. South Africa is in a complete mess. You actually see the breakdown of democratic, civil rights, etc., right now. And China, anyway, so essentially, I think BRICS would have been a good idea if they had also said, we want to try and create a fundamentally different economic and social and political system. But that's not happening. And I don't see that happening because mindsets are always the same. So that's my sort of short answer to it. There's a BRICS summit coming up, I think in August in South Africa. They actually want to now do BRICS Plus, which means they want to bring in another 12 or 13 countries, if I'm not mistaken, to make this even more powerful. Again, sounds good, but unless they do this fundamental mind shift, in terms of what the economy and politics should look like, I think it's going to be basically business as usual, except it's our own skin color people will be doing it. If I might be a little perverse racist. Does that? So for people like me, it becomes a very difficult thing because we say something like this, we then say, oh, you're anti-national and you're pro-US. It gets into a very difficult terrain because arguing against our own governments necessarily doesn't mean you're pro-US. It's not like if you're against me, you're with the enemy kind of thing. So it's a very difficult terrain. So we have to always give a complex response, and then it's not so easy to give a complex response and in a public discussion or a debate. But yeah, that's the dilemmas we're in right now.
Yeah, I would like to can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. I don't know. My question goes more to how to make in practice what we are discussing about. No, and the question is focused in how to make this outscaling. Like, what is your opinion? How should be the strategy to actually outscale this movement, or what we are pretending to shift? And also related to networks, I'm like finding myself trying to get into these international networks, being a shepherdess, and seeing that is complex to be both in the practice, rooted in the territory, knowing what is going on there, what the people are doing there, and at the same time spending a lot of time coordinating with other people doing things in other countries, and identifying that there are many academists mainly doing this job, which is super great, but at the same time, I'm afraid that they are lacking quite some of the the reality. So yeah, I don't know.
How to outscale? Again, I can only speak from the experiences that I know of. Which is that if you take, again, let's say food sovereignty, agroecology, and you have a few farmers that start off with these movements in some part of India, right? And then there's a few others somewhere who kind of look at it and say, I'm interested, we're interested, how do we actually also do this? So there's exchange programs, and slowly you actually start building more and more such initiatives which are grounded. And then you link up at a regional or a national level, saying we are now the National Alliance of Organic Farmers. Let's say we actually do have a National Alliance of Natural Farming, or we have the Association of Sustainable and Holistic Agriculture. So these become the national networks, which have 2 or 3 very crucial functions. One, supporting any other farmer or farmer group that wants to make this shift, right? With experience, expertise, knowledge, etc. Secondly, expressing solidarity with you if for some reason you are threatened by a corporation or a government agency coming and wanting to take your land away or some other way hurt you. Third, become a collective force for policy shifts. So if you have one organic farmer asking the government to make a policy direction, that's not going to go anywhere. You have 10,000, that's likely to go much further. So then you create the scale which then has the numbers, but not just the numbers, but also the quality of argument that could possibly make either stop a policy which is perverse or create a positive policy shift. So you had the farmers movement in India, right? You probably all heard about the famous farmers movement 2 years back, where for a whole year the farmers were camping outside New Delhi, taken up, they created new villages, blocked the roads, basically essentially forced the government of India to take back 3 laws that were extremely perverse, which would have commercialized agriculture that much more. The government had to actually take those back. So that is the kind of scale that was created. There were thousands of farmers, and then lots and lots of movements all across India actually joined to that movement and supported it. So that is outscaling. Okay, so it's not any single farmer group becoming bigger and bigger like a corporation. It's not you copying exactly what I'm doing, but you learning from me and doing your own thing. But it is then linking up and creating the scheme. So yesterday I was in Ukshvile, one of the communes, not so far from Kassel, and I asked this question, is there a national network of communes, of people in shared living spaces? Apparently there is. I don't know, you would know this more than me. So outscaling would be this, that you learn from one commune here, another one there, you have 1,000 communes across anti-capitalist sharing economy communes across Germany coming together as a national group, which then creates the same critical mass for policy shifts, or at least for safeguarding any such commune that might be threatened. So that's what I would think would be for in this context here. In terms of the this difficulty of being rooted in territory, but also networking globally is a very real one. That's a very difficult one. It's not easy at all. What we are seeing through the global tapestry is that, and also that not doing this through full-time academics or activists, not just academics, there are even full-time activists, right? Somebody like me could be constantly doing this international networking and not necessarily relating to the movements I'm talking about. That happens very often. So what we're trying with the global tapestry is to get the voices from the ground. And I think this is one case where technology sometimes helps, because the technologies of translation, for instance, or doing online meetings, because physically it's not possible to meet all the time, right, across the world. So as far as possible, not to have intermediaries, not to have NGOs speaking for the indigenous people, but people from the indigenous, representatives of the indigenous people speaking, trying to create space for more women to be there rather than only the men. Those are the sorts of things one has to do. And then, but it's dependent on that local community or local group to designate 1 or 2 people who can actually then be freed from their local production or local domestic responsibilities to be able to be the representative, and also rotate that, not have that person becoming the representative forever, but kind of create the capacity for others to also take up that responsibility. But a lot of this is fairly new. And I think we'll have to just explore our way through how to make this happen, where it is really the voices from the grounds who are in the global network and not only academics, but that is not creating so much burden that they burn out and then just drop out. So we'll meet again in 5 years and I can tell you whether we've managed to work that out or not.
Maybe a question which is connected with the first part of the last question. What I experience, how to solve the causal connection between consumerism and growth to status in the Indian ecological movement, and how you were able to create a new identity around basic democratic values.
So the first question I understood about the link between consumerism and growth, right? And then how to challenge that.
How you solve the causal connection between consumerism and growth to status in the Indian society, and how you were able to create a new identity around basic democratic values in the movement.
So with the first one, we haven't solved that yet. I mean, so we're still struggling with that, because there's 5-10% of India, which is very, very high consumption, people from my class of society, a very, very high consumption individuals and families. And the question of challenging growth patterns or development patterns by also linking to our consumption patterns is something that's very recent. We're trying to show those connections. We're trying to actually talk to families in this class saying that you can be comfortable without having these very high rates of consumption, or that the consumption can also be different, with less waste and less ecological damage, etc. Something like organic farming is a very good example of that, like where you can say that the demand for organic food could actually support the shift to organic production if as consumer I would be making that kind of a demand. But this is fairly recent and it's going to take a lot more time because consumption patterns in India have dramatically shifted only in the last 10, 15, 20 years. It's not much old. It's not like here, which has been for many decades. And so people are kind of newly into this thing of buying the latest iPhone. So if I was to go and say, listen, the latest iPhone has negative ecological impact in Congo or wherever, I don't think anybody's going to listen to me. So we have to approach this in very different and sensitive ways. I think the more difficult thing is that the rest of the 90-95% of the population also, not all of them, but many of them also want to go in the same direction. So that's what everybody's been fed with, right? The dreams of progress is to consume more and more and more. And that's an even more difficult population to work with because they right now don't have enough. And so to go and say that, listen, consumption is an issue doesn't make sense for them. That's why degrowth, for instance, makes no sense in the context of the global south, right? But we have to say, we will work with you to be living well, to make sure you've got enough food and energy and housing and all of that. But let's do it in a different way than what the mainstream economy has done. Right? So these are these twin ways by which consumption will have to be tackled. And also, final point here is that also to be able to break down the supposed connection between growth and consumption. Not consumption, growth and well-being. So everybody says, of course we want growth, of course we want growth, of course we want growth because we have to move out of poverty and we have to be prosperous, etc. But tend to say again, moving out of poverty doesn't necessarily happen through growth, economic growth, and there are other ways to do it. Non-growth ways, not degrowth, non-growth ways of doing it. So these are all arguments we're trying to get better and better at and show local demonstrations to show that it works. In terms of the political identity, I'm not absolutely sure of the question. You're saying, how does one generate a political identity through democratic values? Is that maybe if you rephrase the question?
How the community, for example, and the cooperatives, you've shown in your example, how you were able to create this new identity of collectivism.
Okay.
When no person wants to have status.
Want to have?
Status.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I think this has been a difficult task, but it's been done by showing that through a collective process, you're able to achieve a much more secure livelihood and also higher status. So, the example I gave of the producer company, Dharani, those 3,500 farmers are actually very proud of being part of that collective because they now have an identity which they never had. Earlier, it was just, I'm a farmer, that's it, right? Not that that's unimportant, that's important. But I'm a farmer with Dharani, which they can tell in the market, they can tell the consumer, they can tell somebody like a researcher going in, also creates an additional source of pride, apart from the fact that their livelihood is much more secure. So that's how we have to be able to create that kind of identity. Then you go beyond that and say, can Dharani also be part of a national network of producer organizations? And then you're actually going and meeting other groups in other parts of the country. You never traveled out of your village earlier. Now you're actually going halfway across the country to meet one of the things. That, and then you come back and you're able to tell your community that in Nagaland, this is how people live and this is how the producers company works. And you might also then be part of a delegation to the government saying that we want these policies. So a lot of shifts take place as you enter into these sorts of collective entities, which create a much more stronger political, cultural identity and economic identity than if you were a single producer or for a single consumer.
Yeah, because you mentioned, I was wondering about your idea of the thought of decarbonizing the mines of decarbonizing the northern hemisphere, and if you have any more ideas or thoughts about it.
It's something sort of relatively recent for me, but okay, 3-4 things. What does it mean? What is the human project? What does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be developed? Okay, Germany thinks of itself as a developed country, right? Is it truly developed? What does it even mean? You know, if, for instance, there's a high level of alienation or individualism or depression, as there in many Western countries, would you call yourself developed? You have all the basic needs, so perhaps you are developed in that way, but there are so many other things. Or if the United States, the second highest reason for mortality is overeating or bad eating, then is that developed? Okay, so I think you begin to actually ask yourself those questions, which will be one form of decolonization. That's one. Secondly, have all of you heard of Ivan Illich? Ivan Illich is this actually Austrian, originally Austrian, but lived mostly in Mexico, sort of anti-development thinker and all of that. So brilliant work that he's done. He was once asked to deliver a lecture in an American university whose students were going to go to Ecuador, one of the Latin American countries, to help local people in developing or whatever. So he went and told them, and he was very, very sarcastic guy. So he actually went and told them, I don't know why you invited me, because I'm actually going to come and tell you to stay put, don't go to Ecuador at all. If you want to go and help people, don't go. Because you think you're superior that you want to go and help people. You want to go and learn and tell them what you know in a spirit of equal exchange and relationship, then please go. So this also is decolonized. This whole notion that, okay, we've got everything, but those poor people, they're starving, so we're going to go and help them. Okay, so one needs to get out of that mentality also, because it's not that you guys know everything. I'm not talking about you people in this room, but generally, you know what I'm saying, right? So that's the second form. The third form is looking at one's own economy and consumption patterns and seeing what is the kind of colonization that is still taking place through consumption patterns, through economic production systems, through exchange systems, through the support of international institutions like WTO, etc. How does continued colonization of the global south take place, and how do you change that? Some of you may have seen the recent paper by Jason Hickel on 150 or 200 years of how much resources, natural and financial resources, were taken out of the global south in colonial countries, but how that continues to take place even now. There's actually a net reverse flow that is taking place. So challenging and questioning that, and then saying, okay, how does German economy and consumption patterns need to change in order for me to actually not continuing to colonize the rest of the world. And the fourth or fifth way is where in your countries you actually have elements of the global south who continue to be colonized, which could be indigenous peoples like the Sami and the Lapps in Scandinavia, or Native American peoples in North America. I don't know, Germany has it, I don't know, maybe the Roman community, I don't know, where you actually have marginalized, disprivileged populations who also in some senses continue to be colonized or kind of kept aside. So maybe that's the fifth way. 4 or 5 ways in which I can think of decolonizing of the colonial powers. There's a professor in the University of Vienna who's written this thing on the imperial mode of living. Very interesting. Just come out with the book. Gosh, imperial, Ulrich, yeah. So Uli has come out, Ulrich Brand has come out with this very interesting theory, concept called the imperial mode of living. which also goes a little bit into the fifth part, the fifth parts I was talking about. Imperial mode of living.
There is a time machine. You have a train to catch, and some of us too. So, unless there is a really important short question.
Yeah, it's actually really short. I want to know if there's a translation of people's motivation for collaboration.
Say that again, but if there is a
If there's a translation of
hesitation.
Of people's motivation for collaboration. So there's like a work on the different ways that people decide to work in
Collaboration. Oh, you mean so sort of motivations for working? Yeah. I don't know if there's any research, I have no idea, but what we find from our work of documenting these sorts of initiatives is that one is what I just mentioned, that you could actually be securing your own livelihood or your own status more than if you were not collaborating. During the COVID pandemic, this was a huge lesson that many communities learned, that where you had collaborative practices in place or which you could create very soon, you survived much better as an individual and as a community than if you were just on your own, right? Whether it was health or economic or many different ways. So one is even just self-interest, that I will be better off if I collaborate. And this means breaking through a lot of what for decades or centuries has been taught in modern society, right? That you're better off as an individual. So in a sense, it's a huge cultural and intellectual mind shift also. But that's the experience, that's what the experience shows. Also that you would actually be much more secure even in terms of your lives. So instead of living this American life in which every family has a gun, if you actually had collaboration in your neighborhoods, you wouldn't need that kind of thing, right? You would have community patrolling or whatever different forms by which you do it. And eventually you create a society in which you wouldn't need any of that. But right now, we look at the American society, it is so incredibly individualized that everybody has to have a gun or thinks they have to have a gun. And then we see what happens as a result of that. So there's many different motivations. There's also the motivation of maybe not a completely selfless motivation, maybe slightly selfish, that if I work in collaboration and this group becomes very well known, then I also get famous or well known, or my attempts will be recognized by others. Right now, nobody knows me. So there's lots of different motivations that people actually come into this.
And on this very last notion, in fact, so how do you order this complexity of different initiatives and kind of things and self-organization? There will be all these communities. I mean, I'm talking obviously about this tension between these communitarian movements and more, let's say, human rights, things like that. How do you keep it in check? I mean, is it basically the Human Rights Charter, or what's the state's role in this bottom-up self-organizing?
The role of the state. Well, I think in the interim, until we do have a state, I mean, for me personally, we need to move towards stateless societies. I mean, nation states, not state has many different meanings, but let's say the current form of the nation state. But in the interim, I would say that the role of the state, of the nation state, is to safeguard people's interests against corporate, criminality, against its own agencies doing whatever they're doing. In the case of very severely marginalized peoples, to provide the welfare services that need to be provided. That's why in India, the Food Security Act is important, but it's not enough. You need to go beyond that, as I said earlier. So I would think that in the interim, that should be the ideal role of the state. But the more the state enters into collaboration with the private sector, the less that's going to happen, unfortunately. That's what we're seeing everywhere. The other day, somebody told me, try and use ICE and not the local trains, because with privatization, German trains are also getting very delayed. I don't know how true that is, but that's what I was told in going to Berlin. But anyway, so I think The role of the sort of classic role of the state in terms of welfare and protecting the rights of people is what I think needs to be continued to be pushed. But in the short run, not, I wouldn't say that that's a forever role.